Wonderful. Thank you, Braema. That was a very passionate and thought-provoking presentation. And back to your SDGs progress, a lot of work still to be done across ASEAN. Introducing the next speaker, Teck is APAC Vice President of the International Commission on AI Safety, Global Ambassador to the Global Council for Responsible AI, a not-for-profit founded in Washington, DC, with 77 chapters across the world, and is also President of the GCR AI Singapore. He's also the Principal ASEAN Consultant of the Public Policy Asia Advisors, and is admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Singapore, an internationally recognised expert in AI governance, cybersecurity and digital policy, with over 35 years of leadership experience across law, technology and ASEAN regional governance. He is also the author of the international acclaimed book, Cybersecurity Guardians of the Digital Frontier. Please welcome Teck Looi.
Thanks a lot, Neil, and please let me thank the ASEAN CXO Association and also my former colleague from ASEAN Secretariat, the Senior Director, Mr. Yoong, for the invitation to participate in this leadership forum here. Please, I would like to start by being explicit about the lane that I'm going to stay in, because that's what will make the panel a bit more useful rather than repetitive. Firstly, congratulations, Braema. That was an absolutely comprehensive round-the-world trip on the scope and application of social enterprise. And I'm not sure how much more I could add to that. I probably would not go the overview there, and I also understand that Yoong would be speaking on how cities actually plan and fund at the municipal level. So let me see where I can add value in this speech here. I'm going to talk on something that's underneath both of those areas which my very distinguished colleagues will be presenting and presented, which is the regional rules, the standards and infrastructure that decide whether a social enterprise can plug into the digital economy at all. I'll call it the plumbing layer, like Elon Musk. When it comes to the president, US president, cabinet, he says, I'm just tech support. So I'm just a legal support here in the presence of my very distinguished co-panelist. So the one reframe here is, I'll reframe the issues here and then look at the three problems that we have in relation to this plumbing layer, and what is my recommendation forward. So it should be grounded in a short example so it stays concrete rather than abstract. So let's begin. Yeah, firstly, the brief for this section, when I first received it, made a very good point. It says a social enterprise is not a silo, right? So I want to sharpen that a little from where I sit, because I think the word silo actually undersells the problem. The digital economy's rules, the ones that govern data flows, platform access, digital ID and e-payments, were largely written with two players in mind: the big tech and big government. Platform rules were built around large-scale operators. Cross-border frameworks, even those that I work on, were negotiated at a trade volume scale. And this is really quite pertinent because we are trying to build a regional market integration of the ASEAN economic community. So you have to take in all the large blocks first, so the trade volume scale. So neither was built with a mission-driven, community-rooted enterprise in mind, which Braema has quite correctly pointed out. And of course, those are the areas and gaps that she's highlighted very adequately, in which a lot of work that needs to be done by public policy officials in the development sector. So when we speak about will social enterprises transform ASEAN cities, we are really asking them to succeed inside an architecture, digital architecture, development architecture, that was never quite designed with them in mind. Let me explain. That to me is the actual missing engine. It isn't a lack of ambition on the ground. It isn't a lack of good ideas. There are plenty, and I'm sure we'll hear about some of them today, not only just in this room, but also in all the other discussion rooms that's present in today's leadership forum. Is that the region's digital governance track, a competition rules, the data rules, AI rules, cross-border rules, doesn't yet quite recognize social enterprises as a category worth designing for. So it's a very assertive point which I'm making. For the reason I've just stated earlier, because unlike the EU, we are still at the state, we are not a custom union, so we are basically 11 countries coming together, each still respecting our sovereignty and trying to find a common landing spot for the economic collaboration that we are looking for. So if you're a CIO in this room, you likely live a version of this pattern yourself. Data localization rule or licensing regime that was clearly shaped by whichever 2 or 3 players were already large enough to be in the consultation room before anyone smaller even knew it was happening. And it's also happening right now too at the AI level. I mean, the big conversations are being dominated by the more advanced countries, and a lot of the smaller countries are just a price taker at this point in time. We are more followers rather than leaders. So at the conceptual level, it's not just happening at the social enterprise, even concurrently at the AI development level. So I'd like to spend my time making that concrete, because the system doesn't recognize us can sound abstract until you see exactly where it bites. There are 3 places. The first is, of course, regulatory. So I spent a number of years at ASEAN Secretariat together with my senior director, Yoong, overseeing, so for me, I was overseeing competition policy, consumer protection, IP rights, and market integration. So what I saw repeatedly is that our digital economy frameworks, the rules on data flows, platform obligations, digital ID, e-payment licensing, these were negotiated with large enterprises and cross-border trade volumes in mind. And rightly so, because we intend to unlock the 1 trillion potential GDP within the next 4 years in the ASEAN region. So picture a digital, now let me just ask you to picture a digital skill training social enterprise, say based in Batam, right? That started as a 5-person outfit and has grown into a 50-person operation with its own learning platform and a small e-payment arrangement for course fees. Now, it's too large now to be waived as informal, but it has no realistic path to full formal licensing either. So the compliance overhead would consume most of its annual budget. It sits in a genuine no man's land, too small to be inside the formal regulatory conversation, too active to be ignored by it. So here's the mechanic that matters. Compliance thresholds and licensing tiers are almost always binary. So you are in scope or you are out of scope. And those thresholds, paid up capital, annual revenue, employee headcount, were calibrated with a conventional business in mind, not a mission-driven organization whose revenue is modest, but whose community footprint is large. And so this is the case for social enterprises. So it is also worth noting who's typically in the room when these thresholds get negotiated. And the usual suspects are the large platforms, the incumbent industry associations, which I've also led, government agencies and organizations. Organizations like this one simply aren't. That means the social enterprises. So that distinction sounded procedural, but it determines whether an enterprise like this can ever grow into full compliance or stays permanently just outside it. The result is that social enterprise ends up regulated by default, caught by whatever rules that happen to apply, rather than regulated by design, with anyone having actually thought up about their situation. That's a meaningfully different starting position even before you get into enforcement. So this is the concrete version of breaking the silos that this brief talks about. The silo isn't just attitude or mindset, it's written into the regulatory architecture itself. So it's a very fundamental and foundational problem that all stakeholders need to look into in order to break that silo. So the second place where it bites most is trust and cybersecurity. So if a social enterprise wants to plug into a mainstream digital platform, and right now everybody is plugged into the mainstream digital platform, a payment rail, or where there's a marketplace, a data sharing arrangement with a government agency or an MNC, it has to meet essentially the same cyber trust and data provenance bar as everybody else. And we know that it's already happening. Small, medium enterprises are having issues trying to comply with all the various technological compliance and governance framework which are already in place. What more social enterprises? So, but without the compliance budget of a large firm. So let's take that same Batam social enterprise again, trying to get a payment gateway, for example, payment gateway account, so that it can take their courses, fees online. Now, the gateway provider will ask for a security audit, right? Something like an SOC2 report or equivalent attestation before offering standard commercial terms. So that audit alone, and from my own experience too in getting them, can cost more than its entire annual technology budget. And unless we're going to get subsidies, and I have in the past hated charities before, and we need to do audits. And it could only be done because we had subsidies. And we could not possibly draw it from the donations that we have collected from the charity sector. So that audit can cost more than its entire annual technology budget. So it either goes without the gateway, accepts punitive manual review terms, or routes payments through a personal account, which creates exactly the kind of provenance gap that makes the next compliance conversation even harder. So it's a genuine chicken and egg trap. No audit budget without scale. No scale without the payment access the audit was supposed to unlock. So how do we even get this started? So this bar is about to get higher, not lower. Elsewhere in this forum, you hear about the push toward audited provenance, verified AI and data systems, a trust layer for the digital economy. That's a good and necessary direction. But if we build it the way we usually build these things, calibrated for large vendors, added as an afterthought for everybody else, we will quietly exclude social enterprises all over again, just as we are asking them to scale. Right? So cyber insurance underwriters are moving the same way, which means the trust layer conversation and the insurability conversation are converging on the same enterprises being locked out of both. So the point isn't less regulation, it's kinder to social enterprises. It's the opposite of that instinct, actually. The point is, build tiered, proportionate trust standards from day one. Or we lock this segment out of exactly the digital economy this session is asking them to join. So for anyone here who owns a trust or security architecture, that's a design decision sitting on your desk right now. It's not a hypothetical one. If I may, the third place where it bites is statistical. And this one is of course quieter, but I argue it's the most consequential because data and statistics is what enables you to make policy decisions and actual on-the-ground changes, which is aligned with your business and social enterprise's mission, plus also your projections. So Yoong, of course, will be looking at measuring participation, not just GDP. And I agree with that completely, but I want to go one level more mechanical though, because there's a specific reason that's hard to do today. And in most ASEAN jurisdictions, social enterprise isn't a recognized legal form the way private limited company or cooperative is. National Statistical Office classify economic units by legal form and revenue tier. Now, if the category doesn't exist in company law, it doesn't exist in the chart of accounts. And the civil servant literally cannot allow budget to a line item that doesn't exist, however sympathetic they are. So it isn't reluctance, it's the accounting structure that has no box to tick. So our national accounts and most ASEAN digital economy dashboards doesn't disaggregate social enterprise contribution at all. It gets folded into the SME bucket or the non-profit bucket and disappears either way. There's simply no code to count them by. So here's why that matters more than it sounds than it should. If policymakers cannot measure a segment, that segment will keep losing out in a strategy and budget conversations. Not out of hostility, just out of invisibility. You cannot prioritize what you cannot see in the data. And because this is a cross-border measurement and classification problem, is squarely a regional governance issue and a precondition for any participation-based metric to actually work. So for the delegates in this room, thinking about digital economy dashboards, this is worth noting. It's a classification decision, not a new piece of legislation, which makes it one of the more achievable fixes on this list. So, regulated by default, trusted at a cost they can't bear, and invisible in the statistics that drive policy. These three symptoms are the same underlying condition, an architecture that wasn't built with this segment in mind. So ladies and gentlemen, I would not want to leave this diagnosis without a prescription. So here's the one proposal I'd like this room to take away. I'll call it a digital economy accession pathway for social enterprises. 3 parts, deliberately simple, and each has a precedent already sitting somewhere in ASEAN's own toolkit, which matters because it means none of this requires us to invent any new machinery from scratch. The first is, of course, the tiered standards in which I mentioned earlier, a proportionate set of requirements on data protection, cyber hygiene, and AI use disclosure, calibrated so a social enterprise can meet them at low cost rather than facing the same bar as listed company. This isn't exotic. Differentiated compliance obligations by organization size already exist in data protection regimes across the region. And we expect that same logic here explicitly. And I can draw from my experience heading a youth charity which is backed by the UN for several years. We have 3 different categories of charities, very small ones, the medium size, and then the really huge one. And each of which must have tiered and graduated compliance standards. And 2, regional recognition. We meet that bar once in one member state, and it's recognized across ASEAN. So there's no need to recertify at every border. ASEAN already runs mutual recognition arrangements for professional services like engineering, architecture, and accountancy. So we apply that instrument to a digital economy compliance standard instead of a professional qualification. And 3, statistical visibility. A satellite classification code in national accounts. So member states can finally measure this segment's economic contribution. This has precedent too. Tourism satellite accounts already exist internationally as a recognized methodology for measuring an activity that cuts across conventional industry classification. So we are proposing the same technique applied to social enterprises instead of tourism. And I want to build this deliberately on what would be placed upon you, which is the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement, which I believe Yoong would be mentioning later, at the regional vision layer. So I'm not introducing new machinery, I'm pointing at what that agreement needs to contain for social enterprises specifically. So it doesn't simply repeat the same blind spot at regional scale. And the model for proportionate standard is already being discussed elsewhere at this forum, in the AI governance and trust layer work on audit, provenance, and procurement guardrails. So a digital economy accession pathway, tiered, recognized, and visible. And finally, what I ask everyone in this room, CXOs and policymakers alike, to actually do starting Monday, because none of these three problems I've described need a new law to start closing. You go back and audit your own platform onboarding requirements. If you run a marketplace, a payment system, or any data sharing arrangement, ask honestly whether your compliance and onboarding process has an unintended large enterprises only bias built into it. So one that quietly locks up exactly the kind of partner this session is asking us to bring in. So if you're a CIO, this one is within your own span of control. You don't need to wait for a regional agreement to review your own onboarding flows. And then bring what you find into the DeFi, the Digital Economy Framework conversation, and into the AI trust layer conversation happening elsewhere at this forum, because the accession pathway I've described only works if it is designed from the start, not bolted after the fact, which is how we got here in the first place. And I want to share very quickly, I was in Saudi Arabia speaking on the future of governance framework for AI in security framework. At the end of the delivery of my keynote, there were a lot of interest as to how they could incorporate the issues about governance at the conception level. So there's a lot of interest actually for multiple stakeholders who want to incorporate social enterprises in. So that's really the whole argument in one line. Designed for this segment deliberately, keep discovering forum after forum that has been left out again. So a digital economy accession pathway for social enterprise that we're looking at is must be tiered, recognized, and finally visible in the data. Thank you. I'll hand back to me.
Thank you, Teck. That was again another great presentation. Certainly, for Australian context, a lot of that challenges with social